Hey guys, have you heard of Goldbelly? Oh my god, it's the coolest thing ever. It's this amazing site where they ship the most iconic, famous foods from restaurants across the country, anywhere nationwide. I've never found a more perfect Valentine's gift. They ship Chicago deep dish pizza, New York bagels, Maine lobster rolls, and even Ina Garten's famous cakes. Seriously. So, if you're looking for a Valentine's Day gift for the food lover in your life, head to goldbelly.com and get 20% off your first order with promo code GIFT.
Hey listeners, this is Peter and welcome back to the History Shorts. Today's episode is brought to you by the Podcast Republic, your ultimate listening app. Discover and subscribe to thousands of podcasts from around the world. Download Podcast Republic today, available on Google Play and the Apple App Store. Today on History Shorts. American history is often told through wars, elections, or founding documents. But beneath those visible turning points ran powerful undercurrents of belief. Moments when ordinary people felt the world trembling, not from armies or revolutions, but from sermons, hymns, and sudden conviction. Twice before the Civil War, the United States was swept by waves of religious revival so intense that they reshaped politics, culture, education, and even the meaning of freedom. They were called the Great Awakenings, and they didn't just change how Americans worshipped, they changed how Americans understood themselves. We finish today with the history brief and some famous people's last words. A quick word from our sponsors.
Shipping, billing, admin, payroll, marketing. You're managing all the things, so why waste time sending important documents the old-fashioned way? Mail and ship when you want, how you want with Stamps.com. Print postage on demand 24/7 and schedule pickups from your office or home. Save up to 90% with automated rate shopping. That's why over 1 million small businesses trust Stamps.com. Go to Stamps.com and use code PODCAST to try Stamps.com risk-free for 60 days.
This day in history. On January 25, 1915, Alexander Graham Bell made the first transcontinental telephone call, linking New York and San Francisco and shrinking the vast distances of the United States. On January 25, 1949, the first Emmy Awards were presented, marking the rise of television as a dominant force in American culture, a medium that would soon shape politics, entertainment, and everyday life. Story of the day. By the early 1700s, the British colonies in North America were growing rapidly, economically, geographically, and socially. Churches still stood at the center of community life, but many ministers worried that faith had grown stale. Sermons were formal, predictable, and often more intellectual than emotional. Religion, critics warned, had become inherited rather than felt. At the same time, colonial society itself was changing. Trade was expanding, cities were growing, and Enlightenment ideas about reason and science were circulating widely. Traditional authority, whether political or religious, was quietly being questioned. Into this moment of uncertainty came a dramatic challenge. The claim that faith was not about tradition or hierarchy, but about a personal, emotional encounter with God. The First Great Awakening began in the 1730s and reached its peak in the 1740s. One of its most influential figures was Jonathan Edwards, a deeply intellectual New England minister who nonetheless believed that faith must be experienced viscerally. Edwards is best remembered for his sermon, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. Delivered in a calm, controlled voice, the sermon described humanity dangling over the fires of hell, saved only by God's mercy. Listeners wept, cried out, and clutched pews in terror. For Edwards, emotional response was not hysteria. It was proof that God was working directly on the soul. The message was radical for its time. Salvation, Edwards argued, did not depend on church membership, family status, or even education. It depended on a personal conversion experience. In one stroke, spiritual authority shifted from institutions to individuals. If Edwards provided the theology, then George Whitefield provided the spectacle. An English-born preacher with a booming voice and theatrical style, Whitefield traveled thousands of miles across the colonies, preaching in fields, marketplaces, and city streets. He spoke to crowds of tens of thousands, an astonishing number in the 18th century. Benjamin Franklin, no evangelical himself, marveled at Whitefield's ability to project his voice so far that even the back rows could hear every word. Whitefield's message was simple and powerful. All people, rich or poor, educated or illiterate, stood equal before God. His revivals cut across colonial boundaries and denominations, creating a shared religious experience that transcended geography. In doing so, they helped create something new, a sense of American identity. Not everyone welcomed the revival, I should say. Established ministers, later called the Old Lights, criticized the emotional excess of the awakening. They warned that untrained preachers and uncontrolled enthusiasm threatened order and reason. Supporters, known as New Lights, fired back that true faith should move the heart, not just the mind. The conflict split congregations, denominations, and even families. But it also expanded religious pluralism. New colleges like Princeton were actually founded to train revivalist ministers, and dissenting churches gained legitimacy. By empowering ordinary believers to question religious authority, the First Great Awakening planted seeds that would later flourish in political soil. The idea that individuals could challenge tradition, even defy elites, would echo loudly in the American Revolution. By the early 19th century, the United States was independent, but far from unified. Rapid westward expansion, industrialization, and urban growth created anxiety and dislocation. Old communities dissolved as settlers pushed into frontier territories. Alcohol consumption soared, inequality widened, and many Americans feared that the young republic was losing its moral compass once again. And once again, revivalists stepped forward, and this time they spoke the language of reform. The Second Great Awakening, beginning around 1800 and lasting into the 1840s, was much more dramatic, more activist, more democratic, and more explicitly political than the first one. Its most famous figure was Charles Grandison Finney, a former lawyer turned preacher who believed revivals were not miracles, they were events that could be planned. Finney introduced new techniques, protracted meetings, public prayer for specific individuals, and the anxious bench, where sinners sat publicly to contemplate conversion. Critics called these methods manipulative. Finney called them practical. But Finney's real innovation lay in his message. Salvation, he argued, carried obligations. A truly converted Christian had a duty to reform society, to combat sin not just in the soul, but in the world. Nowhere was the Second Great Awakening more visible than on the frontier. Massive camp meetings drew thousands, sometimes lasting for days. People sang, prayed, wept, and testified in scenes of raw emotion. These revivals made religion even more democratic. Women played central roles as organizers and moral leaders. African Americans formed independent churches. The message that anyone could be saved reinforced the belief that anyone could act, and that belief fueled reform movements across the nation. The Second Great Awakening became the spiritual engine behind abolitionism, temperance, prison reform, women's rights, and public education, all topics that you learned about before, but which trace their, pinnacle or spark, you might say, to the Second Great Awakening. Figures like Frederick Douglass and Harriet Beecher Stowe drew directly from revivalist moral language in their own calls to end slavery. Yet, the Awakening's legacy was not uniformly progressive. Some revivalists used the same language of moral certainty to defend slavery or reinforce traditional gender roles. In the South, evangelical Christianity often blended with pro-slavery ideology, sanctifying hierarchy rather than challenging it. The revivals intensified moral divisions that politics just could not contain. By the 1850s, Americans increasingly framed national debates as battles between good and evil, a mindset that made compromise very difficult and conflict, well, quite inevitable. In this way, the Second Great Awakening helped set the emotional and moral stage for the Civil War. Together, the First and Second Great Awakenings transformed American life. They reshaped religion from a hierarchy-esque institution into a participatory experience. They expanded education, encouraged reform, and legitimized dissent. They taught Americans to believe that society could and should be morally perfected. But they also revealed a paradox at the heart of American history. Movements born in hope can deepen division. Faith that empowers can also polarize. The History Brief. The following comes to us from John and Claire Whitcomb's 1987 book, Oh Say Can You See? Unexpected Anecdotes About American History. Here are some famous last words. William Henry Harrison was the first president to die in office. He served only 1 month, but it was a month of constant hounding by office seekers. His final words were, and I quote, "I can't stand it. Don't trouble me. These applications, will they never cease?" As Daniel Webster lay dying, he heard the doctor say, "Give him a spoonful of brandy in 15 minutes, another in half an hour, and another in 3/4 of an hour, if he still lives, that is." The directions were followed until it came to the 3rd dose, when the attendants had trouble deciding if he was still alive. Webster raised his head and said feebly, "I still live." They were his last words, and he got the brandy. 80-year-old Aaron Burr, the former vice president, didn't belong to any church, a situation several clergymen were anxious to remedy. He curtly rejected them all except the Reverend Dr. P.J. Van Pelt, who used a much more subtle approach of discussing theology in general. As Burr began to fail, Van Pelt made a strenuous effort to get him to accept God. Burr's last words, said with a humorous glint in his eyes, were, "On that subject, I am coy." Thank you so much for tuning in once more and helping make this little show such a mighty success. If you like this show and you want to help with its production, you could always donate a few dollars at buymeacoffee.com or become a Patreon member and listen to these episodes ad-free. Both of those links could be found on our website at www.historyshortspodcast.com. You could also send me an email at peter@historyshortspodcast.com. Have a great rest of your day, and I will talk to you all again tomorrow.